Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we are talking about Final Fantasy XIV in 2020. Specifically, we will be looking at a Final Fantasy XIV dungeon, the Stone Vigil. This is... I was going to say what number of dungeon this is, but I've completely lost track at this point. I've done quite a few dungeons. What I can tell you is that it is part of the main scenario quest, so you will have to do this dungeon as part of the story. And with that being said, if you're someone who hasn't played the game or is super concerned about getting into and having the story spoiled for you, I would stay away from this video because I will talk a little bit about the story. I am holding most story discussion until I've kind of finished the first Realm Reborn chapter, at which point I'll discuss that, and then we'll dive into the expansions, which sounds like such a far off time frame for so many people who've been following this channel and know how slow I am. But I mean, I am progressing, like I'm getting there bit by bit. I will also mention that I am unfortunately slightly sick, so if my voice starts to sound weird, if I cough, if I sneeze, I'm super sorry. I don't feel like achy or anything like that. Like I feel fine to do the recording. It's just my voice might not be as beautiful as it might be other days. But yeah, there you go. Some people like it when I sound sick, so that's maybe you prefer this. We'll find out. But yeah, the dungeon itself, I'm going to talk about the dungeon first because I usually get distracted in these, and this way I can just get right into it. This is another dungeon I decided to heal. It's been a while since I've done DPS just because of how quick the queue times are for healers. It's really hard for me to not want to just heal, but I do really want to try out the Bard again because I've gotten a few more skills, and I think it would be fun to jump into a dungeon. So maybe next time, if I'm feeling like waiting for that queue, I'll do it. And being realistic, the queues aren't actually that bad on DPS characters. It's an instant queue oftentimes as a healer, so I definitely enjoy that when I can get it. But yeah, healing wise, I'm definitely using a lot more skills, whereas in earlier dungeons I would really just sort of spam the one heal skill that would just top the tank up. I'm using a lot more AoE skills and pet skills and clearing debuffs and stuff like that, or at least I'm trying to. Hopefully you see improvement in this footage. Every time someone leaves a comment with a bit of knowledge, I'm super appreciative, but I'm always worried that I'm not learning from it. It takes a little while of practicing and reading and then practicing and trying to really get in the habit of doing the proper skills. And I think it's easy to default to a skill that you know is going to save someone as opposed to maybe using a skill that is better for the situation. But yeah. Anyways, let's talk a bit more about the aesthetics of the dungeon. We are in a very cool, old, creepy-looking castle-y thing with, once again, what I'm going to describe as lots of dragons. I was called out in my last couple of videos for naming things that aren't dragons. So I'm just going to say any dragons that were in here that are dragons were cool. Anything that merely resembled a dragon was also cool. But I'm not going to go through and specify which one I think is a dragon and which one I don't, because obviously I'm not as skilled at that as some people might be. But I do really enjoy anything that has to do with that kind of beast look of a dragon. And there's quite a bit of flying in and sort of rapidly assaulting, which I love. And it does end with a final boss fight that I'm going to call a dragon. Looks quite cool. He gets enraged by our dark friend who keeps coming and trying to make our lives a little bit more difficult, which is unfortunate. I like how he just pops in at the end of the dungeon, is like, hey, deal with this. Yeah, it's fun. The main story here, as it'll turn out in the end, is that we end up getting the Enterprise, which is an airship. Not to be confused with a different spaceship Enterprise. We rescue the airship from this castle where it has been sort of laying here. It seems like it's kind of degraded based on time and weather, but it is able to fly us out. So once we defeat the dragon that is blocking it, we are able to escape with it, which is really cool. And Sid, who is I hope it's I hope I'm saying his name right. It really bothers me that there's not as much voiceover, because the one thing that voiceover does, like even if it's just the occasional cutscene, is that you at least know how to say all the names properly. And I mean, it's a pretty simple name, so I kind of hope that's what it is, but it is nice just to get that sort of baseline, so whenever you're reading it, you're like reading it the right way. I find I do that very often in books, is that I will establish my own way of saying a name or saying a word, and then it'll just be burnt into my mind by the time I'm done the book. And then if a movie comes out many years later, or I'm talking to someone and they're like, they say the name differently and probably correct compared to how I've been saying it, it's really hard for me to adjust and accept this new way of saying it. So I would have preferred a lot more cutscenes, where I think we get a bit more of that later on in the game, which makes sense with, just the game becoming more popular and them having a bit more production quality and stuff like that. So, this is a big way of me explaining that I'm sorry for mispronouncing names and words, which I think I say all the time in this game. But yeah, so he gets his airship, which is super cool. And we were recently revealed that he is, he was an NPC that we were helping out. Like I say, I'll touch more on the story kind of content in a recap video for the entire ARR chapter, which we're getting closely to the end. Slowly but surely we're getting there. And I'm really excited to talk about so many like plot points that I found quite interesting, and some that I found quite pointless, because there were a few pointless things tossed in there as well. So, and I think to really review anything, you have to put some of the positive and negative into it, or else it feels like you're not really doing a true review. But so far, I've really enjoyed the story, despite some of it moving a bit slower. But that's also me, who's slow as well. But yeah, that's kind of a synopsis of this story of the dungeon. I love the aesthetics. I love the gameplay. I thought it was a really good dungeon, a really nice length. I think that's something that's happened, like a very consistent thing I've had with Final Fantasy XIV dungeons, is that I found them to be a consistent length, and a length that's very pleasing to play. A length that I would say you get home from work and you want to do like a dungeon, and you do the dungeon and you feel very accomplished, but it doesn't feel like it's draining your entire night away or something like that. So it's a really nice place to be in. And I also really like how they do show on the side the amount of like objectives in the dungeon, so you kind of get a good feeling for how long it's going to be right from the start, which is really nice as well. But yeah, so and you've probably noticed that I'm doing this dungeon a little bit differently by talking about all aspects of the dungeon right away, instead of sort of waiting for the time at which they appear in the video. The main reason I'm doing this is because I've found in some of my other videos I'll forget to talk about something, or I'll feel really rushed because although it's an important piece, it only happens in a few seconds in the actual video. And this way I don't feel like I'm going to get distracted and talk about other stuff, which is probably about to happen because I've just finished talking about most of my discussion points I have written down here. And yeah, so the other thing I really wanted to talk about is, Final Fantasy XIV in 2020. I wanted to really hear your guys' opinions on the game. You might have noticed on the channel recently, I've been doing a few videos titled, what did I do recently? I did hordes.io in 2020, and there's going to be a few more of those style of videos, and I want to do one obviously for Final Fantasy XIV, and really highlight some of the pros going for the game, because I think this game and this franchise is in a very good position. Obviously Shadowlands, not Shadowlands, comparing to Shadowlands, I'd say that Shadowbringers had a very positive release reaction and stuff like that, whereas Shadowlands for WoW You know, obviously there's some interesting things going on there, but people are in a very interesting state with WoW where they're not sure what they can trust, not sure what kind of systems there's going to be. Whereas Shadowbringers had an overall very good reception, and it seems like the game as a whole is on an upswing. Whereas World of Warcraft and a lot of other MMOs I could mention have been on a downswing throughout 2019. And I really wanted to see your guys' opinions on what kind of things you're excited for in 2020. Like, what do you think's going to be introduced to the game? What's been confirmed to be introduced? What do you think are going to be real big game changers? One of the big ones for me, and I've mentioned this in a few other videos, is that they do plan to sort of look at the initial main scenario quest for A Realm Reborn, and they're trying to condense that, which I've stated so many times that the number one thing people in my comment section or emailing me or whatever, anyone who's trying to get into the game and is having issues with the game, is because they feel like they're just doing quest after quest and that things are moving so slowly. And certainly from my perspective, without so much of the community making it obvious that the game gets really much better, the first, few levels, I would have definitely been considering more if I really wanted to invest my time. And I think, once you do take that plunge and you get in a little bit, the story is quite interesting. But if they can find a way to condense it to a point where you get into the interesting stuff right away, and then it is just mostly interesting, I think that's really going to help retain a lot of new players. And when we're talking about MMOs today, one of the biggest things that the industry has to be mindful of is that new player first impressions, right? Specifically, like in games like Final Fantasy XIV, where you have a free trial that allows players to kind of get a little bit of a taste for the game. Well, if that taste is kind of the worst taste your game has to offer, it's not a great system. So I definitely think the game needs to work a bit on that, and it seems like they're going to, so I'm really excited to see if that gets introduced in 2020 and how much of an impact that makes to the new player first impressions of the game. But yeah, if there's anything else you guys can think of that you're excited to see that you think I should mention in kind of a recap for 2020, I'm obviously a lot more focused, like in my own experience with the new player first impressions of the game, as I haven't made it into the later portion of the game, and I think it would be unfair for me to give too much detail as to my thoughts on it. What I do actively do is I watch a lot of YouTube content from people who do the endgame content way more than I do, and I like to see their opinions, but I really want to establish my own opinions as well and get to play through it, because I think it's really hard to give your thoughts without having experienced it yourself. But just anything that you can look forward to and really that you're excited about in 2020 would be great. On the other side of things, I'd also be very interested in hearing what kind of content you guys want to see for videos in terms of Final Fantasy XIV. In a recent video, I kind of outlined that I'm planning to continue this Saturday edition of Final Fantasy XIV. I think it's been one of my favorite video series that I've ever made. And although I feel like I'm progressing and I know everyone wants me to get into the later levels, if there's any kind of side content that you think I should go and explore some more, for instance, some of the professions and like different systems, I've kind of let those drift to the side, whereas at the very start of the series, I was very focused on exploring all those different systems. So if there are some systems you think I should sort of explore or, check out again, now that I'm a bit more experienced and a higher level, I'd love to hear that as well. I'm always looking for video suggestions, and often if people comment and are really interested in something in the game, I'm probably going to check it out. So I definitely always appreciate that. But yeah, guys, I think I'm actually going to cut the video here. I know this is a lot shorter and it wasn't a full-on run through this dungeon, just because my voice is starting to give out, which is such, an unfortunate thing. But I feel like I'm going to get through this sickness really quickly and just be healthy once again, which would be great. Alternatively, though, if you did enjoy this briefer version of a dungeon video, let me know as well, and I'll keep that in mind. But I definitely like the mix of doing full-on live, like every moment of the dungeon, or any kind of gameplay, versus kind of more summarized versions like this video has turned into. But yeah, guys, hopefully you are having a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching.